We are live. Hey, chat. I know Jamie. I know you're in there. Jamie Tripp. Welcome, welcome. And Hugh, I see it in there. Please give me a holler if you can hear me. Good evening, September and June. Can you hear me, September? This is how high tech of an operation it is. But I think most of you know that already. Uh, all right. They're good morning from Australia. That always blows me away. Lake Moran, welcome, man. Welcome, welcome. All right. Well, hey everybody. Welcome to the April Industry Pro interview. My name's Adam. This is Adam Makes Beer. And today we are going to be chatting with Eric Anderson from Saucy Brew Works. But before we get into that, just a couple of housekeeping things. CBC is right around the corner for all of our pro friends out there. It'll be good to get to Nashville. I did acquire the hat while I was in Austin last year. Now may be the time that I need to acquire the boots, but I think we've been through that. If you see me at the conference, please give me a wave and say hi. I would love to express my gratitude to any of you that follow along with the content that we're making here. The May live stream Q&A will be Friday the 5th at 8 p.m. So go ahead and start dropping those questions. If you're Instagram people, drop them on Instagram, Facebook people, and you know I'm going to put that post up on YouTube as well. So get those questions in. And just one other side note, if you are going to CBC, I'm going to be doing a meet and greet at the Blickman Engineering booth. And there's going to be some more details to come. So if you feel like stopping over and shaking my hand and watching me flash my teeth, then come on over and say, hey. And speaking of Blickman, before we dive into our discussion, Blickman Engineering has been the pioneer of nano brewing. And they have helped hundreds of successful breweries achieve their dreams since they started with a one-barrel system in 2006. Now offering a full suite of brew houses up to 15-barrel skidded and insulated, matching cellaring equipment, keg washers, grain mills, and more, sized specifically for the nano brewer. Blickman Pro Brewing systems are competitively priced without sacrificing quality. And the simple design and factory direct support from our brewing experts gets you up and running faster than anything else on the market. When you're ready to go pro or just kicking the tires, be sure to reach out to them for expert advice and a partner to help you through it all. Turn your dreams into reality by reaching out to Phil, Tom, or Josh at probrewing@blickmanengineering.com. That's probrewing@blickmanengineering.com. Blickman Engineering Pro Brewing is proud to be the equipment sponsor for this channel and is committed to helping every brewer, no matter where they are in their journey. Eric, sir, how you doing?
What's up?
It's good to see you, man. It's good to see
Good
you.
to see you too. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, definitely. It's this is one of the things that I did not see happening when I first started doing the YouTube thing. I really was just like, well, I'll do these videos in the brew house, and then it's like, well, maybe I could answer some questions live, and maybe I can get some people to give me some questions. So I started doing that, and then it's been a fun offshoot, because I also think it's one of those things where there's almost not enough time to just plain talk beer with people sometimes. You know what I mean? Like when we have CBC coming up, and I know you've been in the game for a while, and there's going to be people that you get a chance to see, and it's just quick. You know what I mean? It's usually in a loud conference hall or at one of the breweries where there's an event, and sometimes it's just hard to talk beer with people and kind of talk the stuff that we're really excited about. And
yeah, man,
so this has been one of those things where it's kind of it's been a lot of fun to do, and so yeah, I'm excited to be doing the thing tonight with you, man.
Agreed, man. And I agree with CBC. That's like always like the download, like, oh, we get 5 days to just think about beer, not
Hmm.
about like, just all of the other stuff that it takes to make this thing work. It's a nice like back to home moment. You're right. It's really nice.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I mean, let's get into a little bit of your background and ultimately kind of your path into the brewing industry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's weird to tally the numbers. Oh, and if you hear any crazy noises, it's this amazing dog named Sophie. She gets rambunctious, but she'll be okay,
No
I think.
worries, for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of been a minute. I remember when I first got into this industry back in 2007, the late aughts, if you will.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and I remember looking up to people that had been in it 10, 15, 20 years, and I'm like, well, like it's just weird to be a part of that class now. But yeah, I started
Sure.
in '07, just home brewing in college. I was in undergrad at Allegheny College for microbiology, and Matt Allen, he was working for, I think, Rolling Rock at the time, or Stroh's, or
Okay.
Straub. Maybe it was Straub. He came in and he was about to start Voodoo Brewing Company in Meadville. And he came into one of our food micro classes and really just started talking crazy. I was like, what?
Yeah.
He just kept talking beer, and I just took down everything he said, and I started talking to him, and I asked my advisor if I could do my senior comprehensive project on the genetics of multi-generation and quick yeast propping. Just go on with my
Sure.
camera here. There we go. So like to see what would happen with the yeast with multiple repitchings as soon as it finally cropped out. And it was a whole project, and then I kind of went crazy from there. But went to Siebel after that and did the whole World Brewing Academy, spent time in Munich at Dummens, um, learning the same criteria, kind of the same way again, but in German. And for some reason,
Sure.
it was different. But I mean, half of it's just the being in Germany and around all these amazing historical, 1,000 plus, no, not 1,000 plus, but almost 1,000-year-old breweries.
Sure.
It was very humbling. So that was how it kind of started. At the same time, I had decided it was interesting because after college, I was like, I'm either going to Nashville for music or I'm going to brewing school. At the time, I hadn't gotten into brewing school. So I was planning to move to Nashville in September,
Sure.
and I was waitlisted at Siebel, and then got in and went, and didn't look back. But now the music's making a little bit of a return too. So it's kind of
Yeah.
nice.
Well, the two paths that are definitely on the creative side.
They definitely are. Yeah, there's a lot of similarities in the way that you can kind of let your let whatever the signal's coming in, kind of let it out, grab it and let it out. If that's the
Sure.
right way to say it.
Sure. So, if there's this is I kind of like to frame it this way. If there's one thing about what you do as a brewer that makes you say, I would do this for free. Because I mean, let's be real. I mean, we all, at the end of the day, we do ultimately go because we get paid. You know what I mean? And there's some days that are a little harder than others. There's some day where it's more work, and there's some days where it's more joy. What's that thing
Yeah.
for you as far as this whole process that is just that thing that makes it the best?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I really appreciate that you ask it that way. Um, it's it's a really interesting thing to be able to find an intersection where you're doing something that you really care about, you're passionate about, the innate creativity that just has to flow through you is able to become something more than it was, where you do what you love, sort of thing, but you
Sure.
also are able to release something that's very that makes you happy. And I think I'm fortunate to have found that with beer. That really is, in a very short way, the way that gets me out of bed, because I get to support my staff and my team, and which I'm proud to have you on there. I really am.
Definitely.
You make my job way easier, honestly.
That's
So,
kind of you.
and it's great to have the counterpoint. But you get to support, we have a staff of 220 now. That is insane to me. I mean, 8 years ago when we were just talking about this over a beer, the magnitude of what it would become didn't really strike me, and it has, and it still does. So being able to support that many people and to support their passions and teach and learn and grow and obviously pay, it's like you
Sure.
said, to get you out of bed, but it's more than just money. I think lower on the happiness level. I think for a lot of people, they'd put their pay. But being able to be creative and being able to be yourself and learn and grow, I
Yeah.
think, are really important things.
Yeah, and something that I neglected to mention before, as I'm getting used to doing this whole thing, is Eric is the head of brewing ops at Saucy and co-founder, so that'll help to flesh out some of what we're starting to reference there as well. Yeah, I do think it's interesting from that standpoint, because there's folks that are in the industry and for them it's a job, and that's great, right? Like there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a job, and if your space in this industry is a job for you, that's cool. But there is something special to and I think, whether it be from a managerial standpoint or even from a coworker standpoint, to have those people that do have that kind of that more intense connection to it, right? That there is something to the industry being passion fueled.
Yeah, that's 100%. That's 100% right. And my wife will make fun of me because I've said this about our neighborhood, but at a party one time by accident. But basically, the industry kind of found me. Someone's like, "Why did you move to this neighborhood?" I'm like, I mean, honestly, the neighborhood found us. And I was like, why did I say that? Like, what kind of piece of shit? Anyway, and why is my camera doing this like weird? There we go. Okay. And so anyway, but the industry really did kind of find me. I mean, I was literally just in a classroom, and this guy came in and started talking about it. So
Sure.
I didn't go seeking it. It literally did find me. I know she'll make fun of me for that.
No, but it is interesting though, because I mean, I mean, so you have the educational background, and
which is only one of many paths.
Absolutely one of many paths, and the number of people that have apprenticed in, I know, I know my fair share of people that have come from both sides of it, and so it is something, because it wasn't too long ago I listened to Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, and part of that story that he tells is that idea of getting in, on the ground floor, washing dishes, or in our case, washing kegs or scrubbing floors, right? And then working your way up and earning stripes that way. There's different ways to get into that industry. So I don't know. I think it's one of the
one guy talking.
things.
Even if you went to school for it, you still kind of doing that.
Well, sure. Exactly. Well,
I mean, I was the 3-head keg washer for quite a while. So.
Sure, and so that's actually something I'd be interested to get your feedback on. So being on the side of the industry that you're on now, have you hired people both with formal education and people that apprenticed in only? And kind of what's your take on that? Do you have any thoughts on what can be the pluses and minuses there?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I don't know if this is a factor of how fast the number of craft breweries has risen in the last 10 years or not. When I started brewing, and I'm sure you could have a similar number, I think there were 1,200 breweries in the U.S., and now we're bordering 10,000.
Yeah.
So
it's wild.
I don't know. It's wild to see what's happened. It's really cool. But I don't know if it's a factor of, a result of that or not. But I think that everybody that is employed by Saucy, I think Zach might have a little bit of Siebel, but nobody is like a partial course, but nobody is a fully trained, like formally educated in the brewing sciences on our staff. And I don't know that it matters necessarily. I think it's one way to get there, but
Absolutely.
you can work in Joe's blacksmith shop and learn a lot about steel.
Definitely. Definitely. No, I feel the same way. I feel the same way. So we had kind of talked beforehand about maybe talking about a couple of beers that you are passionate about, and that's kind of something that we try to do when we get
Sure.
folks on is talking about the stuff that they're excited about. And so oh, actually, you know what? Let's jump back just a little bit. If you can tell me a little bit more about Saucy Brew Works, because you mentioned
Sure.
that you did that you went through school, and then you talked about kind of the beginning, getting into the industry, getting some experience. If you can talk to us about the founding of Saucy a little bit and what's going on there.
Sure. So between getting into the industry in 2008, there was about a 9-year gap before Saucy happened. So that involved working for the BJ's brewhouse chain, working for the Buckeye Brewing Company that is no longer in existence. The hippie IPA 76, Bling Bling, those are great. So there was a lot of teeth cutting there. And I worked for quite a few years with the Tremont Tap House Butcher and the Brewer group. So I helped them with their brewery project in East 4th Street and downtown Cleveland. Everything didn't work exactly the way I thought it was going to work there, and decided to kind of part ways and see if I could do my own thing with a different group. And that's how Saucy was born. But one of our later questions will come back to the Butcher and the Brewer. So I wanted to mention it earlier because that's where the White Stout was born.
Sure.
But yeah, Saucy is a distributing, packaging brewery. There are 5 locations plus our happy 6th Cartridge down in Kings Mills.
That's
in
right.
Mainville, and which I couldn't be happier about. That's so awesome. It feels so cool. Just like this is how this has all evolved, right? In the last 15 years, all this kind of stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
If you can, can you hear this?
I'm sorry.
No. You can't hear the dog. You can't hear the dog. Okay, cool.
No, dog's just fine. Yeah, no, you're good.
Super cool. So yeah, that Saucy is that, and we're only in the state of Ohio for the most part. A little bit up 75 in Michigan, but we're a happy group of 220 some odd hooligans that I think have a little bit of fun and really try to just drive this fun. I guess you could call it a lifestyle brand. I don't keep calling yourself that. If you had to look it from the outside in, I think that's kind of how I would view it. Just kind of living the thing. Yeah. And make a little bit of pizza, make some other fun food. Getting a little bit more into the culinary aspect, but I think that we make some really cool beer with an interesting mindset that makes it a little bit different.
So, one thing that you mentioned, and I think I think this is this is an interesting thing. So it's like, so you had those experiences at other breweries. So as this opportunity for Saucy develops or presents itself, or some combination of that, what were some of the, and this is not me like fishing for negatives, but it's like, I always think it's really important, and I wish as a younger man that I would have done this more of like how did those other work experiences either form what you wanted to do with Saucy or help develop that? Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think from a conceptual point of view, a lot of what I wanted for Saucy was what I had seen other people have success with and have a lot of fun with. Like the pizza ports of Southern California are really cool, and I respect the way that they operate, and with as little satellites to this kind of main brewery. And
you're fine.
You can hear it now, can't you?
Yeah, I can hear that. It's all right, though.
Hi, my niece. Hi. So part of the concept was that, and some other places that had just been, very influential, and I wanted to kind of recreate something that didn't really exist in Cleveland, of things that I really loved that I thought maybe would work here. But from an operations point of view, and I totally get what you're saying about like you're not like on a witch hunt for, who are these people? Well, some of them don't exist anymore, so I think I feel like it's really on that. But I think that it's something I've learned just as getting older and growing up, if I have to do that, is I really enjoy being heard, and that seemed to be the main thing. I think people call it communication sometimes,
Okay.
and that is true because that's a two-way street.
Mhm.
But when you talk to somebody just for the pure intention of being heard, I think that's a really beautiful and important thing. And I think it was something that was lacking at a lot of the places that I worked, right? And sure, who am I, right? Right. At the time, who am I? And still, who am I? But if you're employing me and you're going to pay me to do a job, do you want to have any kind of insight into what I think is what is actually happening from a, in a very pragmatic way?
Sure.
And that was kind of missing. And even sometimes when they heard it, it didn't get heard. So
Sure.
now that it's not necessarily that you have to react and do something about what I'm saying, but like, can we just have like a conversation and like maybe I can help you understand where this perspective is coming from? Because I think, and now I want to hear that as the boss, right? Like I want to hear what people just say. I want to, whether it's about work, dogs, family, or whatever sports they're into. Like I just want to hear people, and that I think was something that really affected. This is a beautiful removal of the dog that no one can see here, but by the way. Was that on your knees? That's really the driving thing. Like when Brent and I sat down at this big wood table at his house before he moved, we just were like, this is what we want as a general. We want to treat people well. We want to give them things that should just be. It should just be standard. Like y'all have windows you don't have to crank down anymore, right? Like everyone should have 3 weeks of vacation. Everybody should have, insurance. These are basic human needs, and that was really where Saucy started. Was just he and I agreed instantly from not knowing each other too well. We agreed on that instantly, and it was very easy to make decisions, with that starting point. I really appreciate that. I really respect that about him.
Definitely. And I mean, obviously Saucy has been doing well. I mean, a tremendous amount of growth. What would be so transitioning from that spot where you were employee to moving into ownership, and over the last, because it's 7 years now, right? Did I see that? It's pretty much like the 7-year anniversary.
I was the first employee.
Yeah.
I just hit 7 years. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thanks,
So what is like, what have been, because it's, especially when, like when you see the press releases and there's growth and that's positive. What's been some of the things that you didn't see coming? Like what were some of those things that were challenges that kind of snuck up on you? And then like, I don't know. And like, how did that like sort itself out into a positive? You know what I mean?
Part of it, I think on a personal level, I didn't realize how much it would either be a part of the changes that would happen normally over time in myself, or if it was going to be a catalyst for those changes. I don't know which one exactly it was, but I don't think that I expected to develop and change as much as I did. From the way that I handle myself, the way that I basically kind of view everything almost. Sounds kind of ephemeral, but I wasn't ready for that kind of change in myself, and I knew that I was open to any kind of change, and that would just that kind of happened because whether with or without Saucy, I don't know, but there were obviously any life event is going to have some kind of impact on you physically, emotionally, and otherwise. And Saucy brought a lot. It really did. It was the first year. Every 6 months, a year the time didn't feel like it was passing in any kind of linear way, and all these like. I guess you couldn't even look at them as milestones because they were happening. Everything was happening so fast. Relationships were building between coworkers, and the businesses was just, and not like in a like cash coming in kind of way, but just like in like a terms of what you have to do, how big you have to be, what you have to think about, how many people you have to have, how far you got to reach, all these considerations that were just not really didn't see it coming. So. The growth came with or without my expectation or knowledge sometimes. So I think that's one of the biggest things for me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and it's anytime it seems like as you're talking, it seems like to me anytime life ends up throwing at you a different level of responsibility. that's when you realize. I mean, it took me a long time to realize, people sometimes people laugh about the fact that I have 6 kids. I think that kids can play a very active and important role in our development, as much as we are supposed to be playing in theirs. And I mean, I know fatherhood obviously has made me have to not just sometimes it's always looked at, through growth, and believe me, growth was needed, but also change. I mean, those different circumstances end up illuminating parts of yourself that were potentially not illuminated before.
They were there, they just weren't shining, right?
Yeah.
Clouds, man. Right? Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. And so let's start digging into beer a little bit.
Absolutely.
Right now. So
let's do that. I'll join you.
We discussed hacking into the concept of white stout.
Sure.
And so why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it feels odd to me to try to not necessarily put a flag in the style or anything like that, but just looking back at when beers were released and when mine came out, when Butcher and the Brewers came out, it seemed like it was like either the first or one of the first that I could tell. It was a little bit blurry. I think Stone came out with a beer called Master of Disguise right around that same time.
Okay.
They may have released it first. I know mine. I think ours was in the tank when that one hit or something like that. But the idea behind Albino Stout, as it was called, was in between leaving Buckeye Brewing Company, working at their pub, and finishing and opening Butcher and the Brewer. There was a pretty good amount of time. And during that time, I physically worked on the brewery, like literally building it, engineering it, installing tanks. My dad helped me install the RTDs and the thermocouples and all that stuff on the tanks. And but there's a good amount of time where I worked at Tremont Tap House. So between beer engine and tap house, I ran a 29 tap bar with a 300 bottle list and a 48 tap bar with maybe 24 bottle list. Wasn't crazy. But you went through so much beer. You had to pick so much beer. You were shown so much beer, and you get to direct people to kind of things that you think they might like based on their flavor preferences when you ask them. And one of the things I heard the most was, I don't like dark beer. And I'm like, what do you? Okay, but why don't you like it? Do you like coffee? Yeah, I like coffee. Do you like chocolate? I like chocolate. I'm like, and you like vanilla and all those like savory kind of like sweeter dessert flavors? Yeah, I like it. All right. So I was like, well, I think I can make a beer that like looks like a blonde ale, but tastes like that, and kind of show that like people eat and drink with their eyes, you know, and that's to some degree is survival. I get that, and and that's fair, but the color of beer doesn't really, it doesn't completely direct the consumer to, is this a lighter beer? Is this a heavier beer? Is it alcoholic? Non-alcoholic? Is it thick, thin?
Yeah, and isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Because I think sometimes when we're inside this craft beer bubble, right? Sometimes I think we forget that for some people there's still, dark beer, right? Like
too heavy.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there's all the stereotypes, and there's, just like you said, there's the implication of alcoholic strength or body or different things like that. So yeah, man, definitely
nothing to do with any of it. So.
Sure.
So that's kind of where it came from. And so I had a lot of autonomy at that brewery. Actually, pretty much complete autonomy, and I'm grateful for that. I really am, because that was like, hey, I'm gonna make this 5.4% beer, and it was very heavy in oats and malted wheat and a really high mash temp. Hops weren't really a part of the conversation. And they let me do it. I'm like, I think I can make up this flavor with like some coffee extracts, some chocolate extracts, and maybe a couple other things. And it just worked. It really did. And people were like, what the fuck? What is this? Like, it didn't make any sense. And I loved kind of like, I I kind of love confusing people that way. And for the longest time, because of that split for me with the music and the beer, I for a long time was like, well, this is as close as I'm ever going to get to being a rock star. Like I'm watching people drink the beer. That's like them singing the lyrics, right?
Yeah,
It's the same thing. And it was
yeah.
cool. They're like, they drink it and like, this is, and it was just it's a cool experience to be able to not confuse people, but like challenge them to actually be present with their beer and like, oh, this is something, rather than just kind of sit there and eat or drink and not
Yeah,
think about it.
definitely. I do think I do think there is something fun when when you are creating those beers that may look one way but taste the other. Some different things like that. Those are I think sometimes those are some of the kind of there's some of the subtle fun things that we have going on as brewers.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to hear your opinion on this. Like, I generally talk about this around September and August when we start brewing Christmas ale,
Hmm.
which is this for up in Cleveland. It's a thing in Cleveland. It started in Cleveland. I don't know. It hasn't permeated like everywhere,
Sure,
but if you're not making like a 7.5+% red ale for Christmas with spices like ginger,
sure.
cinnamon, nutmeg, you're messing up. Like you,
Yeah,
you gotta give it a shot. And
yeah,
I talk about this kind of this impact that brewers can have on like the memories and the olfactory system that are innate to everybody, and how strong that memory connection is to smell. And I often, like, every time we make the Three Hose, I quite literally think about making cookies with my mom in the kitchen, like at Christmas.
yeah,
Like, this smells
yeah.
exactly like that. And so we get to play with people and their olfactories. You're not playing with people, you're not messing with people, but like
Sure, yeah, yeah.
you get to evoke a sense of more than just a liquid if you're looking for it. And even if you're not looking for it, you still might find it. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Where do you come in?
No,
Where do you weigh in on that?
no, I agree completely. And for me, I mean, I'm at the end of a bad day, I'm much more likely to eat some hard aged cheese, some cured meat, and then when I've had enough salt, I then go to Haagen-Dazs, and when I've had enough sweet, I go back to the cured meats and cheeses. So yeah, man. But so I mean, because for me, like that was for me growing up when I would go out to like when we would have big holidays or whatever. I remember my grandparents flying out from you know it was Union, New Jersey, but my grandmother and grandfather, I don't ever think they left the Italian neighborhood that they lived in. Like that was
Why
still
do I have
their
to leave?
generation.
Everything I need is right
Like
here.
my grandmother, like when she came to live with my mom, she had I think she had never had tacos and never had chili. Okay, because it
Wow.
was
Cool.
just she lived in her neighborhood, and she had the Italian grocery, and that's where she went. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's just so interesting how small the world could be, and not that, and it wasn't that long ago
Not that
either.
long ago. Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
but no. So I mean, so a lot of I remember them flying out to the sticks to visit us in Michigan, and there would be suitcases full of food, and we would do like several course meals. They start at noon, they roll until late in the evening, and so all that stuff for me, and so I didn't realize that just the smell of sauteing garlic to me is so explicitly tied to my grandmother's shrimp scampi. So like the smell of garlic and shrimp are completely clicked together in my brain. And so that's what I smell. Like I almost smell like shrimp when I smell garlic going. But no, there are those things. And I remember the first time she used to make these beautiful little sandwiches for us with Italian cold cuts, roasted red pepper, and like a little eggplant marinated in
Mm.
balsamic. And you put that on there. And then I thought that sandwich couldn't be beat. And then she slapped a few fresh leaves of basil on there, and I ate that, and like my brain blew up, and I was a teenager, so it wasn't like I was super into like all this stuff, you know what I mean? So yeah, I do think that there are those sensory things that just take us to other places, and I think that's one of the the cool things that we can try to tap into with what we're doing.
I think Adam Eats Food might be your next channel, because you're selling me. You're selling me out.
Bro, I'm telling you, those sandwiches they'll change your life. But you were talking about kind of that flavor development with with white stout, and so then you ran with it, man. You ran with it, and what was the name of the first version of that you made?
The first beer was called Albino Stout.
Mm-hmm.
I guess not completely sensitive. It's it's not
sure.
I'm not meaning any kind of offensive way.
Sure.
But that doesn't make it okay. So
Sure.
I may have to revisit that name, but it's not my name anymore. So
Sure.
I let that one go.
Sure.
That was a 10-barrel brew house with steam jackets on the side and bottom of the kettle. And you would get just a little bit of color pickup off from that. I used to use my base malt down there was Franco Belge Pils malt.
Okay.
And so it was super light. It was like 1.4, 1.6.
Yeah.
It was really light. I liked that a lot, and it converted great, and it was nice and beautiful, pulp and beautiful. That's a weird way to say it.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Thanks for validating that. Yeah, for anyone that doesn't know, that's a nice thing. But you got a little bit of color pickup on it, and it was such a funky brew house because I've made a lot of the same styles of beer moving to a brow con, which is a completely different thing. Sure. And the same beer tastes differently. I mean, it very much does. I didn't change my thinking or my mode of operating. That was such a funky brew house because I designed it to be gravity fed because it was a 2-level restaurant with the downstairs had all these beautiful horizontal lagering tanks for brights, and then 8 10-barrel fermenters. 8, yeah. And the whirlpool was downstairs. But the way that it was designed, like your kettle is, I had to maneuver the piping so it didn't go to the control panel. But long story short is I had to crack the downstairs whirlpool like stop valve. And I had to have it cracked, because if you didn't crack it, there would be a big air bubble that bloop through the kettle and fuck up your true breast. I did this again. Or I can't do it again. And so I would crack it, and I would open the kettle valve and race down, just hauling it downstairs. And I never fell. I always caught it, but I had to go and switch it like real fast, and I would just catch it by like 5 seconds every time. And I don't know, something about that.
I think we've all had situations like that where there was something where you're like,
doesn't seem safe.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, so it was a quirky brew house, and then moving it to Saucy, I should say that leaving Butcher and the Brewer was a really hard thing to do, emotionally, physically. It was a hard thing to do. I put so much time into it. I love the people there. There was a really great vibe. It wasn't going the way that I some parts really just kind of stuck, and I had to stop. But I found those things in Saucy, and I was eager to go do that and move on and express myself in a different way and help people learn and grow and help the community and hire people and pay taxes, those things as a business. And it was really emotional, I found, to let go of some of those recipes. Not that I didn't want them to have them, but it was like just something that felt like it was more yours than theirs.
Sure.
Knowing that you work for somebody, it's theirs. I get that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I listen. I had a different experience. So the first brewery that I worked for, I mean, that's what it was. I mean, it was all my recipes, my names, all these different things, right? And then that relationship ceases to exist for one reason or another, man. And it's a loss. It's a loss,
And it's kind of like unwritten, right? Like, I mean, is it written? Like you never see on a piece of paper like, okay, if you leave, all your shit's ours. Like, okay, I'll just sign that. Like, that's not how it went, And it's weird to create and not feel like it was a direct. Anyway, so it was very emotional to let that beer in particular go. I knew there was something special to it. I thought it was amazing, and I saw people enjoying it, and it was something that I thought that should continue to move on. And I think it still exists. I think they still make it.
Nice. But
yeah. So Saucy, we call something different. So
sure. So we kind of started hitting on some of that stuff. So let's take a look at a little bit of nuts and bolts as far as you know, we don't need to be ultra specific on weights or anything like that, but just some concepts as far as some things that you've enjoyed doing, and how you've enjoyed building a beer like this in the past. You had kind of mentioned already that there's, on some level, you've got to be leaning on some adjunct when you're making a beer like this, or at least that's one way to do it. Because sometimes if you're going all malt, there's a lot of things you can do, but there's certain things you can't.
Right.
So yeah. So I mean, what are some of those? Was it kind of a one and done thing? So when I made Escape, that recipe has changed very, very, very little, because it's this is not. I would say it's quite rare. Usually, I'm consistently tweaking things, trying to get better, more efficient, this, that, and the other. But Escape was one of those, the pina colada beer, where it just kind of worked the first time, and so you kind of stick with it. Has there been any tweaking to the adjuncts that you've utilized over time, and what adjuncts do you think are beneficial when you're making a beer like this?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. So, yeah, a lot of it does rely on the adjuncts. And at Butcher and the Brewer, I did not change it more than once or twice.
Yeah.
And that was more of a titration of the adjuncts than it was the base. The base is probably unsurprisingly very much like a hazy base. A lot of oats, a lot of malted wheat. Tried raw wheat, didn't really like that.
Yep.
And I think but this is just the way that I'm doing it. And I think there's lots of ways to skin this thing. And
Sure.
I think 100% depends on what the brewer wants to choose for their yeast. I think is kind of the bigger one. Like this, Phobia changed more than Albino did. So Phobia went through a couple iterations of different base malts.
Yep.
Not by choice of the beer, just because that was happening in the brewery, and also by choice, adding caramel malts, removing caramel malts. Didn't like the caramel malts. We keep it pale, and
Sure.
then it went through different yeasts. It went through Chico, and it went through London 3 and London 1, and maybe another British one. But I think we all kind of found that while it was cool, it was pale. It was like pale yellow hazy. It felt weird that it was, and it tasted a little bit cleaner with Chico. So we like to use a clean yeast on it, ferment it kind of cool.
Yeah.
And let the malt kind of speak for itself cleanly, plainly, and then let the adjuncts do the rest of the work to bring that coffee chocolate kind of caramel backbone.
Well, I think it's interesting that when discussing the grist, you talk about it kind of as a hazy build, because that does make a lot of sense. That
and hazy
style.
wasn't a thing then either.
Oh, for sure, right? For sure.
2014, like. Nah.
Yeah, to start creeping in around then. I'm trying to think. I think in Michigan, the first place that really hit was Old Nation, and that was probably maybe 2015, 2016, maybe 2017, because I think by 2017 that was already like a 99-point beer on whatever, and people are M43, people are trading for it and stuff. But that style is interesting from a build standpoint, because I remember originally when people started chasing that beer style, right? There was a lot of very slurry heavy beers that were hitting the market.
Yeah.
So like even when you you would get a pint, and it would, like, by the time you were done, there would be some left in the bottom of your pint, right? Yeah, right. A little treat, a little vitamin B12 down there.
Delicious.
And so, but I think over time, more people have understood how to build that style out. And I remember some friends and I talking about it, and we're like, okay, well, let's think about other beers that are traditionally hazy, and you think about wit beer, and you think about hef and different things like that. So I do think it's interesting that you're talking about that. It is almost kind of that build, because you do want to be utilizing those, that it does make sense to want to be utilizing those oats for kind of some of that beta glucan, some of that softness, that viscosity, right? And then also some of that softness of the wheat too. So now when you're building a beer like this, do you want it to be is it brilliantly clear? Is it best to have a haze in this beer to kind of push that white kind of look to it?
Originally, that's what we were going for by switching to some of the London and British yeast that might throw that haze.
Sure.
And we were successful in getting that haze for a little while in Phobia. But I don't think any of us liked it. It seemed to make it more muddy and kind of fatty feeling in the mouth, and I don't think that was nice. So the oats and the wheat produce a very nice, clean, kind of silky, pillowy.
Sure.
Who am I?
Yeah.
I can't say pillowy.
No, I'm good with pillowy. I got no problem with pillowy.
Buzzwords. It's a buzzword. Pillowy citra. Anyway, but it produces. It definitely gives that off, and we find that with Chico, we get a really nice. If you start with a nice bright wort, you get a really nice bright. It seems even more, I think, surprising to the end consumer when you can see right through it, and it still tastes like this
Sure.
thick, like, and the biggest part of that, besides the grist bill, is obviously like a really high mash temp, like
okay, so yeah,
bordering on too high.
So yeah, getting into the mash here a little bit. We already talked about, kind of stacking up some wheat and oats in there to kind of build that up to go pillowy. And but you're talking really, so like how high? Like are you like I mean,
like 158, like
yeah, when you're pushing it,
like
good for you, man. That's wild.
I don't love this, but like,
so
156, 158, yeah.
What does that do? So like, I mean, and if you don't know the exact numbers off the top, and I don't know if I would be able to answer this on my system, but what do you see the swing on your system? Like, can you, like, how much does that tend to increase? Like, so most of your beers are mashed in around what temperature? What's that primary rest? Because I believe are you step mashing?
We step mash. Yeah. We have the ability to step mash in a really nice way. Yeah. So every beer's pretty much completely different.
Oh, okay.
The IPAs.
Sure.
Yeah, the IPAs are. I mean, the average, I guess, would say like IPA 152, 154 sure. range. Yeah. Typical.
Yeah.
Kolsch 149.
Yep.
Up to 162.
Yep.
Phobia, I believe, is a single rest at 156.
Okay.
And our malt that we're getting from Origin has a really high DP, and so we're finding that it converts quickly.
Yeah.
So, which is nice, because at 156 or 158, it's like it's not going super fast,
Sure.
And you kind of risk skipping one of the rests. So, yeah, I think it's only 60 minutes at 156, and then we mash out, straight to mash out.
Yeah. No, that's cool. And so you're getting and so just to be clear, Phobia is the current is the white stout in its existence now, correct?
Phobia, yes, it is. Phobia was one of our core beers when we first started almost 6 years ago, and it's FAUXBIA, because like faux is fake, phobia, fear of the dark kind of thing. I know it's not actually, phobia is not a fear of the dark. Fear of the dark is, I think it's I forget what it's called, damn, but that is a phobia, like the fear of that is the phobia. So anyway, it's not a perfect name, but we worked on that. And the first can was super cool, and the next can is amazing too. But the first can had this like really creepy, like what was that album from Tool, Schism, I think it was. It had this like this crazy looking eye on it, and like it looks like it's creepy. I mean, I honestly, I love the way that our art is now. It's much more, it's better. But yeah, it was just, I don't know. Where was I going with this?
Oh, we were talking. We're just kind of making sure people knew that Phobia was the white
Oh yeah,
stout,
yeah.
and then
Right,
kind
Phobia's
of
the stout.
looking at parameters of a little bit because we are talking about mash and that you're mashing in higher, and so
Right.
I'm ultimately leading to kind of like starting finishing gravity type range.
Sure.
So,
So Phobia was the core beer, and then it left maybe after year two for about a year. And we shrunk the core and changed the core completely. But now we make it as it's kind of like a cult favorite. Oddly, it's one of the I think it's one of the top 4 or 5 most checked in beers by Saucy, and
nice.
we've not made it that much
Sure.
at all really. So now we brought it back, and it's kind of an alternating skew with our Hefeweizen for 6 months and Phobia for 6 months.
Sure.
And it has a bigger brother that came out. It's come out twice. This year we brought it out as the way that Phobia is normally pronounced in the pub, which is Foxbia.
For sure.
Give me a can I have a Foxbia?
Yeah.
You can, and now it's 9.5%. So we have Phobia at 5.4 and Foxbia at 9.5.
Okay.
So
So
that's the bigger
five
brother.
four. That's interesting. So 5-4. Where does that beer tend to finish? Because you
That
are
beer's
pushing that up with the mash
Yeah,
temp.
that beer starts at 15.4, I want to say,
Okay.
and ends probably in the low fours, high threes, something like that.
For us, yeah, and I think that makes a lot of I think that makes a lot of sense because we'll talk pretty frequently about how you need to have a certain amount of residual sugar in order to
Oh yeah.
amplify adjunct character in a beer. And it doesn't even have to be adjunct. I do think sometimes there's even something to like you can look at some hazies out there and some of the ones that are really popping with super juicy, right? But people are making some really high residual sweetness hazies,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Like I was
Yeah,
listening
for
to an
real.
interview the other day where one guy was like, "Oh, we go really dry, and we're down, we're down 10, 14, 10, 16." And I'm like, "Wow, man, some people must
Really
really be
dry,
getting
huh?
up there." Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, it's style relative, right? But no, but I do think that I can't imagine that there needs to be some measure of residual sweetness for a beer like this, and especially if you're not throwing a lot of non-fermentables in there, you're probably going to want to really need to be able to drive that through the mash.
For sure. And you need dextrin malt in this beer, or some. I mean, you can control it with the mash, but it does help to add dextrin malt. The problem with
I
dextrin
agree.
malt is it's 10 lovabond ish or
Mhm.
more, and it on a beer that's supposed to be super blonde. And when you add the adjuncts, you do get a little bit of color pickup. So you gotta stay blonde on it, and so it's kind of hard to add dextrin malt. But I think we do have probably 55 pounds in that mash.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, we do actually.
Um, so we're digging into the mash a little bit, and I do know, when we talk about adjunct, you mentioned chocolate, coffee, and I know people have a lot of different takes on things. I've heard of people using anything from, and now it's probably up to how different people pronounce it, but like star anise or star anise, I'm not sure how different people pronounce
Yeah.
that, but it's essentially like
Yeah.
like a black licorice,
Yeah.
incorporating something like black licorice, something on the cocoa component, something on the coffee component, and even some different warm things. I've heard you mentioned vanilla, and when I say warm, I know some people have even worked like with maybe a little hair of cinnamon as well to kind of lift something like that. What's kind of your go-to adjunct type things to magnify this? And has that changed over time? Like, have you used different types or just different brands?
Yeah. Yeah, and we kind of alluded to it earlier with the brands of extract. So the brand that we were using for albino stout doesn't make that coffee extract anymore. So
Okay.
that immediately switched. And the brands now, no, we use one brand for this as Saucy, and the mix has. Oh, sorry, I should take that back. No, it has changed since we started to now. We originally, because that manufacturer stopped making the one or two of the products we were using, we started to move into like Chalaca,
Hmm.
and that did not work
I was gonna say, what was your experience like with
at all.
that? Because I've used that on occasion, and I'll tell you, I've really struggled. I haven't done a lot of chocolate beer, but I had struggled. I've struggled getting chocolate character that I want just out of the some version of the raw ingredient.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm with you. The Chalaca, I don't know if we handled it properly. I mean, we went by the manufacturer's recommendations, and nothing to say
Sure.
that I don't know. It just didn't come across the way that we thought it was going to come across, and we were better off in this application at least with an extract that was pretty high potency for chocolate,
Sure.
like some kind of chocolate extract,
Sure.
and because it had to have the least color pickup possible. So we
Definitely.
found a manufacturer that makes like this super high concentrated stuff, and it's not visible really. I think we pick up 4 or 5 probably. That'd be my guess. I don't know if we measured it, but that's
Sure.
about how much I guess you pick up from that extract. And the
Sure.
coffee extract, we use a coffee extract as well, and that has not changed. Circulating on coffee turns it into kind of blonde cold brew, and that
Yeah.
doesn't like, you don't want it to be a coffee beer. You want it to
Yeah.
be a roasty kind of chocolatey, savory, kind of thing.
Yeah, I can
And
see that
I love that.
actually, because that was, that's an obvious thing to talk about with trying to make a beer like this, and so I'm glad you mentioned that, because yeah, I mean, you do hit you do hit that space. Just on a complete side note, I think it's Cato over at Sonder, when you guys have been down, have you had their coffee
I
Kolsch over
have
there?
not had that, and we have a
Dude,
beer
that's
named Kato too.
it's oh no, maybe it's Voss for them. No. I think it's Cato, because
Yeah,
they have a Kolsch that's Voss, and I think Cato is their coffee Kolsch.
I'm not trying
If
that.
if
Sounds
that's up
delicious.
when you're on, dude, absolutely kill it with that. But that's just an aside. So so no, that's interesting stuff. Um, kind of looking at the kettle side of things when we're going to be talking about our hop additions. Where do you come down on kind of what you're shooting for IBU with a beer like this? And we'll keep in mind that you're talking about like a mid 5% take on it, right?
Yeah, the mid 5% take. I mean, the hops don't really matter. It's kind of like I saw a talk by shoot Jacobson, the Crooked Stave dude,
Chad
and
Jacobson, yeah,
Chad Jacobson. That's
yeah,
right. And
yeah,
I remember his talk was called "Fuck Your IBUs." And I was like, yeah, which I'm generally like, yeah, and all beers. I know he's talking about like sours and Brett's.
Sure,
Yeah, Chad, yeah. That dude's a wizard with Brett.
yeah,
Um, but I kind of take that same approach with albino or the white stout, with phobia. I typically go for 10 to 15. Just it's
yeah.
there. It's just a little bit of bitterness, and I guess it would be a real stretch to say that I'm shooting for a certain kind of stout. 'Cause I'm not like,
Sure,
I
no,
just
no,
want
no.
to. Does it taste kind of like stout? Like, yeah. Is it white? Like, and then we kind of got there. Like, you know what I mean?
Well,
Like, I'm not shooting for like a Russian stout. Like, I could see the star anise or those kinds of things for like a Russian. I
yeah,
could see that. If it was
yeah.
hoppier, if you wanted to go for like an American stout, I could see that.
No,
It just might be kind of seemed like a far cry at the time. So
sure, and I think especially when you're talking about something, I think I think there's a time and place for style, and I think that's great. But when you are talking outside of those ranges, you're you don't have to be worried about, you have to think about the beer itself, right? So
yeah,
like really, and because it's speculation for me. So like when I'm the questions I'm asking you on this, like I don't know the answers ahead of time, and
yeah. I guess
so
we didn't
like
talk about it.
no, and so like but everything falls into place, because in my mind, when I'm doing if I'm going to be doing an adjuncted stout, right? um it starts to get more difficult the more bitter you make that beer, right? as far as being, because first of all, you're going to start doing what bitterness does, which is balanced sweetness, and you need that sweetness in order to help amplify some of your specialty adjunct character in the beer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so I was expecting to hear it. My guess is, if I was going to spitball, I would be like, it's probably got to be 20 or under, because you don't want to start putting yourself in a competitive space where that bitterness is starting to battle the other components of the beer. All you're doing is, so you're really just using that bitterness as something to say there's enough to foil the volume of sweetness to keep the beer drinkable. Are we on the same? Is that where we're?
Yeah, and if your next question was, what variety, it doesn't.
It doesn't matter.
Really
It's
It's all
IBU.
60-minute.
That's the other thing. So that's what I was gonna say. So I'm guessing you're not like trying to feather in some fuggles or something and late on here for a little English character. You know what I mean?
No.
And I like to do that too. Like I don't think your adjunct beers where people are expecting adjunct is the time to just do the thing, right? Like that you don't necessarily need those those late noble additions that maybe somebody likes to put in. That can be fine. That can be fine in some instances, but in something like this, I think people are looking to get smacked with something. Yeah.
This is not a hoppy beer.
Sure.
Yeah, and also I want to redeem Cholaka because they have the chocolate. I'm sure is fine, and I just haven't used it the right way. But I did like their coconut. The one way I use it, I would use it a little bit different the next time. But we did that Lachancea tart pina colada with that coconut, and it was dope. So I won't slander.
That's what we use.
Anymore.
That's what we use in our pina colada, man. And it's
You mean this guy? It's my next beer.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
that's right. Cartridge.
That's right. That's right. That's the I've been impressed with that product. I do think coconut is one of those that it in my mind, if you're trying to make the best possible coconut beer, I just think there's something about you got to have some of the real deal, but you've got to accent it with extract, man. And
for sure.
And we talk plenty on here about, sometimes, I went to a talk at CBC 2022, and it was Beechwood Barbecue. I always blank on his name whenever I'm trying to talk about him publicly. Julian Trago. And he was talking about making fruit beer. And he said, we kind of need to get over this idea of saying, well, you can't use extracts in beer. And like he was saying, and how I've been doing it as well. And a lot of other people do too. Sometimes for various reasons, sometimes the most effective way is to just plain use extract, just plain use the real thing, or sometimes it's using both. I mean, ultimately you're trying to leverage what's most effective for the beer you're making.
Yeah, I mean, from a purist standpoint, or point of view, yeah, I get wanting to use exactly exactly this, exactly that, and that would be cool if you were only serving yourself from the purist standpoint. Sure. Because what's going to come across, you're not starting with a base that doesn't taste like anything. Adding stuff to seltzer and things of that nature, you have a very clear idea, there's nothing here. This will be exactly what it tastes like, what the contribution is. But with beer, you have a base. You have depending what you do, you have a very flavorful, maybe estery, it could be clean base, doesn't matter. You have a different starting point, and because of that variable, extracts and fruit, both of them, neither of them taste exactly like you think they would coming through. Just a lot hops don't either. They don't. These are peachy, whatever. It doesn't come across that way depending on how you use it. So
sure.
I think it's if you're looking for, and I think a good example is a beer we made last year, I Can Teach Blue.
Mm-hmm.
So the original one was a strawberry milkshake IPA called I Can Teach You.
Sure.
But I'd have to anyway. And so I Can Teach Blue was the blueberry version, and we used some blueberries in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that blueberries don't taste like blueberries when you use them in beer. They taste like kind of muddled and not exactly like anything. And so we found that plum tasted more like blueberry, so we used more plum in it than
Mm-hmm.
blueberry.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
it also benefits from a little bit of extract because some fruits they have the sweetness and the flavor of the fruit and maybe the acid of the fruit, but they don't always have that
100%.
of flavor
Yeah.
or like the aroma. The aroma is like the first thing that's lost. And all of these,
Yes.
and like even in grapefruit beers, like a little touch of grapefruit extract makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really true. It's really true. I'm a big believer in that. Thanks, brother. Thank you.
Loving
Oh,
where this is at right now, by the way. It smells
awesome,
great.
man. Thank you. Thank you.
And it's like the thing you can say, like with coconut, like you can border on sunscreen, like
Sure.
pretty easily.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
this
yeah.
is
Definitely.
not that. Not even a little
Definitely.
bit.
Thank you. And that's where honestly, it's that Cholaka product that I use in that because they have the coconut as well. I just think it's just such a great product. I used that for the first time in it was a coconut stout, and I had been making coconut beers for some years, and so they came out with that, and I'm like, well, I'll run it back in a stout, and so we did kind of like a tropical stout, like a little bit more stylistically in that tropical stout range, around 7%, and then we hit it with that coconut, and maybe a little ester profile and that roast, whatever. So it was a tasty beer, and but you just pull a depth of there's this legitimate. And it's not massive in that beer there, but there's a genuine coconut flesh and I say coconut fat flavor. Mm-hmm. If you know what I mean, like because there is something fatty to coconut too a little bit. And
it's almost like the difference between coconut water and like cream of coconut. Like it has that like unctuous character to it.
Yeah. So no, that's I'm on the same spot as you. That's a product that I really enjoy. I really enjoy working with. We did discuss fermentation, and you said you've kind of worked the spectrum with this one, as far as things from British strains to American strains, and kind of being most comfortable with Chico, and that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And then so we're kind of rolling into the finishing, the finishing, carbonation, packaging side of things, which is kind of a catch-all for is there anything, do you like this beer to be spot on 2.5 volumes of carbonation? Do you like a little lighter? Do you like that carbonation dialed up a little higher? Where do you think a beer like this serves best?
Yeah, and I good question. And I think that like if you mirror kind of what a lot of stouts kind of do, that a little bit on the lighter side, I think benefits it. So we like to package around 2.55, 2.5, and knowing we're going to drop down to like 2.4, 2.45. Yeah, sure. And the other thing like is it can kind of get prickly, which doesn't really match a stout profile for me. That kind of like carbonic bite kind of thing.
And
so 2.4.
Yeah, and I do think it's not everything, but I do think it's kind of one of the intangibles, and I know people have different thoughts on this. And we mentioned hazy earlier, and I think you can kind of walk a line. I think you can go with a lower carb and hazy, and it'll help to. I think it can help to create some softer edges on it, right? The flip side is though, when you push that carb up, that beer jumps out of the glass at a different level than it does when it can kind of potentially push some aromatics out,
and out permanently.
Sure,
if you're there to smell, right?
Yeah.
And if you're there to smell them, cool. If you're not, So that's it's a tough one. It's a tough balance on this, and I think, if anyone's gonna mess around with a white stout anytime soon, I would go low, I guess.
Sure.
But
No,
yeah,
it makes sense.
obviously play with it like anything else. Yeah.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And then so the adjuncts that you're talking about are going in on cold side. Are they going
Yeah.
into bright?
Post filter bright side. Yeah.
Post filter
Yeah.
bright
All.
side. And
Yep.
you're running a centrifuge over there, correct?
And we run a Fuge. We run an SPX, really beautiful Fuge. And we can control the output density, the turbidity going out, basically by change. Well, it has a parameter where it won't let it leave if it's too high, but you can also vary that by back pressure a little bit, and also just the pure gallons per minute kind of coming out of it. So the faster we run that thing, I mean, it lets stuff stay in a little bit more. But no matter what, you're never really going much over 400 or 500, ppm of turbidity. So
Sure.
I think that beer probably comes out around 350 for us.
Sure.
But it comes out almost brilliantly bright every time now.
Yeah.
Wasn't something that I was looking for necessarily, and I guess I didn't really have an expectation, but it was nice when it came that way.
Sure.
I kind of like, and that's a deeper conversation about beers, but kind of letting them become their own thing and kind of not having a set guideline to what you think is going to happen with it.
Sure. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit more about that?
All right. I love that your cup is by Blickman. That's amazing.
The Yeti, man.
Product.
It's no joke.
Yeah. I've kind of not necessarily told this story. I don't know if it's a story that much or to many people, but I guess I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, obviously there's a ton of ways to make beer, right? Mm-hmm. And to create things to express yourself as an artist. And I think beer was a really interesting thing for me to find that way, because it something I notice, at least in my music, is that I have a hard time deciding when it's finished and being like, all right, I'm cool to share this now. And beer is a little bit different, where you're expressing yourself in this artistic way. You're creating something out of nothing. And maybe it's a style that you've made before, or maybe it's a classic style you have a recipe kind of idea for, or if you're just shooting in the dark, like a lot of our beers are kind of shooting in the dark. Okay. You don't have that with like creating like a painting. You can paint it, right? And you can say, you know what, I'm going to share this when I'm done, when I think it's perfect, or I'm going to go in this direction. And music can be the same way, but with beer, you kind of have a timeline. Like, you make it, and that stuff's ready, and in a couple of weeks, and then you have to talk to your team about, like, well, here's what it's going to be called, here's how to describe it, and like, you don't really have much choice. You have to let it go. And I think that was a really good thing for my creative development as an artist, to kind of have it forced away from me in a not like in a bad way, but like, it's got to go out. It's ready. Sure. And then also you have that in a weird way, you have this kind of like, no one necessarily knows who made it, and doesn't really matter necessarily, but like, you kind of have this like anonymity to what it actually is. So you get to create this thing for yourself, for everybody else to enjoy, which is really why you're doing it, right? And you don't have to necessarily say when it's done, because it just is done. And you don't have to watch anybody really enjoy it, because like, it will sell. If you're at a brew pub, like, it's gonna sell.
Sure. At
some point, whether it's a 3% smoked wheat beer, which we had that for a while, but like, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting way for me to get into realize the artist part of what I do, and that I enjoy the most about what I do.
Sure.
To have it kind of like forced out and like, well, it's done, and people like it, so cool.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, but the way that I kind of approach beers, and I realize it's kind of the way I approach music, is not starting out with it depends on what it is, but like, for the most part, beers that we're creating from nothing. Mm-hmm. I don't always have a vision or a goal or like a set parameter of like, I want this, like, I gotta have this thing, because sure, I feel like if I'm putting these guardrails up and a predetermined endpoint, that I am the limiting factor of what that thing could be.
Okay.
Because I don't know. Like, I know how these ingredients will react. I know how to handle yeast. I know that our process is sound. I think this will create something cool. I don't necessarily know what it is, and I don't care.
Sure.
Because I want it to become whatever it's going to become. And I've worked with people that had a hard time with that. I think that when it's very process driven, when someone is very process driven, which is a very good thing in a brewery, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
For creating is a different thing than and production. But from that point of view, it's really hard to create for me. I can't, and it can be difficult for me to like pick apart how I actually did the process, because it feels like it's coming. I'm listening. I'm putting it out the way that I think it should happen, and that's kind of how I create beer and music a lot the same way, where it's more listening to what's coming to me and just kind of being a very sensitive antenna and transmuting that into music.
Sure.
Like I'm not necessarily writing. It's coming from somewhere. I don't know where. Somewhere that I love. Seems very peaceful,
Sure.
and it just kind of comes out. And as long as it's good and it helps people and it feels good, I'm doing it. Whatever it is, beer, music, or otherwise.
Yeah. So I mean, there has to be, and I think that's one of the interesting things with people in our field, because I have, a lot of different friends in the industry, a lot of different types of people, a lot of different types of brewers, philosophically, stylistically, creatively, stuff like that. And there is something that is, I don't know, I think there is something challenging about what we do, in the fact that, and listen, you can review a lot of different things. You can go on Google and review a lot of different things, right? You can review your plumber. Yeah, you absolutely can.
And you should.
But for some reason it can be tough when there is like an app like Untapped, which is relatively pervasive, and I think, like, as brewers, like I really think that we ultimately either come to terms with that element of it, or I think it leads to a lack of satisfaction in what we're doing, on some level, right? Because either like you don't care at all, and you never would, and it's legitimate, you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know. What's your thought on that? Because
Well, I mean,
there is that. Okay, I created this thing, and it's out there now, right? I think that's one of the things that I think that's been a source of development for me. Now, listen, it never feels good to not get XYZ score or whatever, right? Or to hear somebody say something negative about your beer. That stuff never feels good. But I do think it is tied to this creative element of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I remember having a phone call with the folks at Untapped, and I told them that they had the Yelp of beer, and they're like, "No, we don't." I'm like, "You literally do.
I mean, it kind
checking
of
this
is, right?
on a
I mean, how is it?
scale." And if I don't claim it, somebody else will claim it. How's that not Yelp?
Yeah.
But and it's yeah, okay. You can. I kind of live by a lot of different agreements, right? And one of them is trying to not take anything personally. I don't take it personally necessarily. Like, no matter what somebody thinks, says, or does, it's coming from their well of experience, their history, who they are as a person, and everybody gets that. Everybody is born with that. Everybody gets that, and or at least should get that. And so, Untapped. Well, people can't do math because there are 5 caps. So each one of them, if it's a 100-point scale, is worth 20. All right. So like, great beer, I loved it, best beer I've ever had, 3.5. You're like, man, that's a 70. Like, multiply that shit. Like,
my one is always like, listen, if you gave me a quarter of a star or cap or whatever it is, and you say, and it's a coconut beer, and you say, I hate coconut, then why did you? Don't do it. Just check it in.
Right.
Just check it
in. Right. But like, whatever. Like, I don't. Honestly, I don't know if I care. The problem is that I almost need to care, because there are entities, there are beer buyers, there are companies, there are distributors that look at these things as an actual metric, and you're like, are you guys using this? Are you shitting me? Like, because the loudest voice is always the loudest. Like, they're always on like, no. Like, and it's just like, I don't know, like I get it, but I don't, and I don't care, I guess, but it doesn't keep me up at night, and it doesn't influence the way that I brew, that I work with beers in any
Absolutely.
capacity. Not because I
Absolutely.
don't care, but because like, well, maybe I don't care. I will take it like, hey, this beer has diacetyl. This beer is flawed in a literal production way, for sure.
Sure.
Yes, and also just reach out to the company if you're going to do that. But like,
Sure.
and most beers shouldn't have that. But if it's more about like, I'd like a little bit more of this, that's never what you see. You're not getting
Yeah.
constructive
Yeah.
feedback
Yeah.
from somebody that knows what they're talking about, and people like what they like, so they are entitled to be like 2 stars, awesome beer. You're like,
Yeah.
thank you.
well,
Thank you.
well,
It's not like a total. It's actually out of just 5. So you're
sure,
not adding to a
sure.
bitter total.
Well. Let's move on to a more positive thing, and we'll chat about these Lachancea Tart beers a little bit.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how you first got introduced to that yeast strain, and a little bit of
Yeah.
what that yeast strain does.
Yeah. A few years ago, so right when Saucy started, actually the year before, I was writing this kind of paper, looking for a grant to start this study. And what I want the goal of the study was to create a world yeast culture. So it was a set of SOPs and a list of accredited or qualified universities or colleges or anywhere that had a lab that we could work with that would enable us to wild forage for bacteria, yeast, whatever microbes are out there, because they're everywhere. They're on your skin, they're on fruit, bark, grass, in the air, you name it, it's everywhere. And it's really cool to have a defined set of yeasts that you can buy and you know that are predictable and we know how they're going to work. But I also thought it'd be cool to see what else is out there. How can we do this? I know there's more out there, right? And at the same time, I think it was the summer of 2016 or 17 that I had went to. I'm spent 17. That I had went to an MBAA meeting, Master Brewers Association America's meeting in Indianapolis area, and went to Upland or Bloomington, Upland.
Yeah.
And they had a presentation by these guys, Matt Bachman and their crew from IUP, and they were basically doing the exact same thing. I was like, oh, and my buddy's like, isn't this like what you were talking about? I was like, actually it is, but these guys are like way farther ahead,
Yeah.
you know. And they had done like a study of 100 different things they had found on all sorts of different samples, and they grew them all. They isolated what the culture was. They grew it all individually in 500 milliliter flasks, right? And they bought, bless them, they tried every single one because they're like, this is science. We gotta know what it tastes like. And they're like, well, 90% of them tasted really, really gross, like just not good. And then, but 10% of those yeast bacteria did actually produce beer out of the wort that were actually tolerable, and most of it kind of tasted Belgian. And I was looking through his list, and I'm like, well, what are these? These are a different strain. These say Lachancea thermotolerance. Like, what does that mean? And he's like, these 3 came off from an oak tree. I think it was in his dad's backyard in Southwest Pennsylvania. And we tried, I forget what the name of it, YH72 and YH83, I think were his codes for them. And I was like, has this ever been used to make like a big batch of beer? Because like it tastes, what you're saying, it tastes cool. And he's like, no, it's never been. I'm like, okay, can I get like this much and I'll grow it? And so it was the first beer the yeast we grew up, put in the propagator in that prop you saw, like the first one that went in there. And we made this blonde wort, and it just let it sour with just that yeast by itself. So the cool thing about the Lachancea is that it is not a contamination. There's not like it's not mixed with any other cultures. There's no bacteria. It's the same size as yeast ish. And it produces lactic acid if it has enough simple sugar in the wort. If it has dextrose, glucose, those things. And it directly translates to the acid production, we've come to find. And so we made this first batch of it, and it was cool. And we started getting it from these guys, and we transitioned into a different brand once it became kind of more popular. That's where the Philly sour came along, and some other strains. Apex makes one special sour, and that's one of the ones we use. But we kind of learned how to use it over time, that it's not a very strong fermenter. You treat it just like a normal wort. You oxygenate it, regular temperature, about 68 Fahrenheit. And depending on how much gravity you have and how much of that is simple sugar will determine how fast and how much it'll drop that pH down to. And we've only gotten down to 3.1. But it's lactic acid only. It's not any of the acetics. It's not muriatic. It's none of the other acids. I don't know, muriatic would be in there, but it's just the one. So it's got this unusual, like very round sourness. It's not like one note like poke you in the face. It's kind of just
Sure.
this gentle. That's why we started calling it tart. I think I actually had COVID. My wife and I had COVID, and we're like, God, this sucks. I couldn't. We opened up a Detroit pub, and I couldn't even go up there for that. But I was like, look at this sour. I'm like, how do we like work with this? And I wanted to bring Lachancea to the forefront. So we started. I was like, well, why don't we just call this like a Lachancea tart? Because it tastes tart more than sour, and I want people to know what this yeast is because anyone that is in that kind of knows Saccharomyces, Brett, PDO,
Mm-hmm.
lacto, whatever. Why should Lachancea be any different? Let's bring it to the forefront. And in the meantime, we'd kind of learned that you need to co-pitch it with a different yeast because it'll outcompete it immediately. You can't repitch that yeast anyway. We tried. We
Sure.
moved it from one sour to what was that beer? Mango number 5.
Okay.
and it no Lubega, and it didn't
Yeah.
it didn't sour it, and we found out that it loses it is so easily outcompeted, and also it is so fragile that it somehow loses the whatever mutation happens, it loses that souring capacity after the first pitch.
Yeah.
So we learned that we would let it sour till the pH kind of stopped dropping, and then we co-pitch it with whatever kind of yeast we want that beer to become.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one we're doing is a Belgian, which I'm
Nice.
pretty excited about. It's the one of the unconditional love beers for our anniversary. It'll be what's it called? Oh, our one of our sales associates, Sam. She has a cat named Newman, and he's this big fluffy gray thing. He's cool, and we're gonna call this Bonjour Newman, and it'll
There you
be
go.
a Belgian golden with plum, fermented on plum, and then finished on cranberry with Lachancea, then Belgian Abbey yeast.
Nice.
It's gonna be
Nice.
wild.
Yeah, man, and I think that's one of the I think that's one of the interesting kind of compelling things about this Lachancea line is, because if you wanted to be making tart beers in the past, you would, people were running kettle sours for a while, and so they would get various strains of lacto into their house, and then they would do the kettle sour thing. I've had some really tasty kettle sours. There's things you need to do. There's things you need to do to kind of safeguard yourself there. And there's great resources online for that. That's one way. I've got another buddy that has enough dedicated tank space that he can just pitch. He has a stainless tank that's really just for his lactic beers. And so he'll run lacto fermentations in there and blend back different things. But so kind of the game changer on Lachancea is it's non-bug. It's non-bug, because that's sometimes people like to say,
Yeast.
yeah, that's bugs, right? But there's the bugs we're
Bugs.
comfortable with, and then the ones that we tend to be a little bit more skittish around, right? And lacto tends to be one of those. So it gives us that lactic production without that concern for your cold side, right?
Without the
So
concern for the cold side, and like if you're making a kettle sour, you're not cooking that biomass of bacteria that's grown
yeah,
into the wort. And
yeah,
sometimes this is not a dig on anyone. I mean, because the process is difficult.
sure.
Um, but I feel like that biomass that gets cooked has a flavor to it, and I don't love like the flabby kind of like meaty thing that kind of comes through with it. But
Yeah.
that's just me.
No, and I mean, obviously, obviously that's a real thing. I mean, it's obviously a real possibility because that is exactly what's happening. And actually, I hadn't really, and I mean, functionally, I know that's what's happening because that's how you keep your cellar clean at that point, right? Is when you're doing the kettle sour, you get it down to 90 or whatever that particular strain wants to be at. You pitch your
Cover
lacto.
gas it and go.
Yep. And then it's dropping pH, and then you're throwing your jackets back on or your direct fire back on, and you're killing all that. And yeah, so that's actually one element of it that I've never actually considered. That's actually interesting.
The
And from a production standpoint, you just lose your kettle too. I mean, that's
you lose your
the
kettle.
other thing, and
Unless
depending on
you have
what
like
you're
a wort holding tank, you
Sure.
lose the kettle. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And so if you need to do anything to really maintain temperature, you know, I have some friends that, goodness gracious, they're brewing where it's warm enough that they can keep it mid-90s, no problem. But
Yeah,
you know, I mean,
been there.
a lot of us, a lot of us aren't in that situation. So yeah, I think that is kind of one of the compelling things about that. And you feel as if that you get a different. So let me phrase that as a question. Do you feel as if you get a different acid character out of Lachancea than you do with, say, a traditional lacto strain?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you do. I mean, you get a kind of if you use an LAB, you're getting kind of a range of acids, and you're only getting lactic on this one. And
Yeah,
somehow it comes out very. There are obviously other organoleptic compounds that are in play, and I don't know what they are, but it is rounding out the beer in a much different way than you. I think we've all had a kettle sour or two that's just like, damn, that thing is acidic. Like
yeah, went too
it's
far.
kind of like it's peeling the enamel, and like
Yeah.
and that can be enjoyable. Like if it's super hot, like that can be very enjoyable. That's not always what I'm going for, and I guess I said earlier that I'm not always going for anything, but and these Lachancea beers, the more that we make, we kind of find that the pH stalls at 3.1 to 3.4, depending on what you're doing, and that doesn't really always correlate to the the sour feeling in your mouth. 'Cause it can be very low, but it can also feel kind of round. I think that it more is more of a on the range of like titratable acidity, the TA scale, things of that. Kind of like when I didn't mention this, kind of like on the white stout, where part of that perceived bitterness of a stout is not just the IBUs, but that dark roasted tannic, potentially tannic and bitter quality of that really dark malt.
Sure.
And it's kind of the same way that the acid it hits a little bit different. Sort of like that. Sort of loosely.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. There are kind of some tips and tricks that you kind of were hinting at earlier that kind of help this yeast do its thing. You know, kind of anything from, you know, are there things that you're doing in the mash, kind of starting at up front, or let's talk.
I can give you like crib notes on how to use Lachancea.
Yeah, talk me through it. Yeah, like what are you thinking? Like, are there kind of how long is that checklist? Is it like a 3 or 4, 5 point list? What are your
Let's
thoughts?
find out. Let's
go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. One, treat the beer like any other beer. As in produce wort the normal way and oxygenate it, knock it out the normal temperature, 68. Or, well, not normal temperature, but for this one, 68. But oxygenate it, do nothing different. 2, underpitch it, kind of like Hefeweizen, where you would, not the temperature, but with a true underpitch of maybe half or a little bit less than you would normally think you would pitch. 3, dextrose, cane sugar, any of that simple sugar is your friend. To get that pH down, because that is purely what the Lachancea is going to metabolize into lactic acid and a little bit of alcohol. It's not a very strong fermenter. 4, when you must, it's obligatory to pitch a different yeast into this beer to make it a different beer. So whatever you want sour, you start with sour. Okay, it's sour. Cool. What do you want to become after that? Use that yeast. Or if you don't know what's going to happen, go nuts. But have your other yeast ready from either like a high Kreuzen beer or in some pitchable quantity that you have in a yeast brink or something like that, or cone to cone, or whatever it might be. Don't reoxygenate it, but shoot that yeast in at a nice healthy rate. And there might be a day lag because you've used a lot of the oxygen and you're asking that yeast to do a lot, so it's going to stress it out. And it seems that we found that most of the yeasts are very tolerant to the acid. So that's basically it. Those 4 or 5 things. That's the hit list on how to use Lachancea, and you're not repitching it.
Yeah. I mean, that's from everything I looked at. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the hit list right there, right? It does need.
It's not too hard, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it does need that simple sugar, and you know when we can talk about it through the lens of fruit as well. Do you think that fruit tends to pair particularly well with a beer like this? Well, actually,
Yeah.
yeah, people will ask. I get this question. Can I make Berliner Weiss with this yeast? What would be your gut on that? Did you actually drink Berliner when you were in Germany? Just as a
Not much. No,
Sure,
we weren't by Berlin though. We were more in the Bavaria,
sure,
Munich area. We went up to Nuremberg, and I think we had a couple of. Maybe we might have had one or two. But it's not. I mean, the regions are very specific. So
sure,
nah,
sure.
we didn't. I mean, I've had my fair share of Berliners, and I actually have a story about my first Berliner Weiss I ever made by accident in a minute. I don't know if it could. Maybe.
Mhm.
I don't know if it'd be sharp enough to be a Berliner Weiss.
I think you're on. I think you're in the. I'm in the same page. On the same page you are with
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
like it can kind of get a goes. It can get a goza, but
Yep.
like
I
Berliner's a little
agree.
bit different.
I
And
agree.
I think that what Lachancea is better at is what we haven't really discovered about it yet. Because I mean, we're just basically figuring out how to use this thing, and I'm trying to get more people to be like, they're called Lachancea tarts. You guys cool with that?
Sure.
But I think what the best use is we really haven't found yet, quite honestly, because there's only a handful of people using it, and it's just not well studied or used, and with so few hands touching it, I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential for it. We have found that it interacts really well with fruit.
Yeah.
Um, Almost every one of the ones we've done has had fruit in it, all except for three.
Yeah.
It's missing something, and it might feel out of place for that style. It's not really a style,
Sure.
but like whatever kind of beer it is, to be sour and not have fruit almost. It feels
Hmm.
like it feels a little weird. One of the better ones we've done that didn't have anything else, and it was with Masthead. We did a collaboration called Drifting Everywhere, and it was this huge hazy that I think it had like 44 pounds of hops in the whirlpool at
Uh
like a 20-barrel batch. I'm like, holy shit, you guys, is this normal? Holy shit.
huh.
And they're like, yeah, it's pub beer. Cool. But it worked. It was mangoey and sour and a little bit like,
Yeah.
man, I hate to say papaya because that's kind of weird, but like it kind of came across that way. But yeah,
Sure.
fruit seems to work the best with it. I'll be and I'll be curious to see how Newman turns out with the plum and cranberry, although I'm not giving it a fair shot. To what I really want to see is what that beer will do with just Belgium. I think actually the best beer we've ever done that didn't have any fruit was for Carolyn and I's wedding 2 years ago. We made a beer called Young and Wild,
Yeah.
and her last name used to be Wild. Her maiden name is Wild, and we made this beer that was like a Lachancea. She came in and brewed with me. It was awesome. I loved it. It was probably the best day at work ever, actually. And we made this beer with Lachancea. We let it finish. I think it went down to like a 3.2 or 3.3 pH, and then we pitched it purely with a Brettanomyces blend.
Mm,
So you had this like acidic, weird, cool thing that
yeah.
slowly like actually fermented into more like actually beer,
Hmm.
but producing all these like very tropical pineapple, honeysuckle, honeydew, kind of peachy notes, and it started to get a little bit funky. But the idea was that we weren't going to let it hang on the Brett too long, so be
Sure.
young and wild.
Yeah.
Also, at the time, I think that we would qualify ourselves as young and wild. Just saying. Uh, and the project of Lachancea was also pretty young and wild at the time.
Sure.
But what ended up happening with that beer is our wedding got a little bit moved around because where it was supposed to be caught on fire because of the California wildfires that were happening,
Oh
and so we
wow.
only had a couple of weeks to schedule it and replace it, and we went down to Sedona, which was awesome, really super awesome.
Sure.
But that beer got a little bit more time on the Brett, so it turned out like kind
Yeah.
of funky and like sour, and it tasted almost like champagne. And I think I
Yeah.
might like rip a mimosa edition of that one sometime soon.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
best use I think is TBD, yet to come. More people need to play with it,
Yeah. That's
and you just started
interesting.
playing with it.
Yeah, yeah. So we did a key lime pie beer recently. So I think you should have cans of that in-house today, by the way.
Yes,
I
excellent,
think Avery ran those back up today. And
awesome.
so yeah, I do think it's a really friendly way to generate that acid. And I do think it pairs up. I do think it pairs up very well with fruit. And you mentioned before, I've ran some Gosa style beers with it, and I think it's really effective for that. I think if you want that real hard cutting sharp thing, I don't, at least the way I've used it in the past. Yeah, I think you need something else for it. But and you know, I think there's also something to what you're doing from a naming standpoint where you're calling these beers Tart. I'm pro calling beers Tart. You know, I just think there's
Tart.
yeah, and even sometimes like and I think sometimes you can lose some people too with just straight up sour. I think Tart is a more approachable word as far as the whole thing goes.
Because I just had a beer with a good friend of mine, Tom Fox, who was actually on my Carol and I's first date. It's different conversation for a different video. But I was like, hey, try this. Actually, I had him try Verde.
Oh, nice.
And we label this as a Lachancea Tart Goza with cilantro, tomatillo, lime, and salt.
Yeah.
And I didn't show him the label or anything. I was like, hey man, like if this was labeled a margarita sour, would you get into it? He's like, man, I don't know, maybe. Because it's more, for me, it's more tart. Mm-hmm. He's like sour immediately turns me off.
Yeah.
I'm like, not that I don't like it or it's not right for the right time, but he's like, just something about it. Like once in a while, it just turns me right off hearing the word sour. I'm like, all right.
I think there are people, but I think you just call it a margarita tart beer or whatever, man. I think you can definitely move with that. I mean, and you'll see, and I think you'll see like with Limelight, the key lime beer that I shot up to you. I think there's like lines that you're playing around, and it's interesting. Sometimes we did a peach Gosa. It was probably in 2022. I can't remember. And one of our bartenders at the time, bartender / salesperson, was tasting it. He's like, this has like a kind of a margarita feel to it because of like some of the light salinity to it. Right, like it's not over the top salty, but there is like that little bit of like rim of salt on. You know what I mean?
I do.
So I think using a yeast like this, pairing with fruit and putting it under the margarita umbrella, I think there's room to run there, man. Absolutely.
Agree without the sour part.
Sure.
And I'll take 30 seconds, and if you don't mind, and I'll tell the story of me making my first Berliner Weiss by accident.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I was getting ready to make a kettle sour. I had the aluminum blanket, kind of like runner's blanket, and some moving blankets to put on top of the kettle. Had the CO2 all figured out. Had the whole thing going, but I wasn't there yet. And I was brewing at Butcher and the Brewer, and I had just mashed in a Kolsch, and Cleveland Public Power went down, and we had no juice, and it's just black. It's just black. Everyone like sick. And I'm like, so this is just mashed, and it was like an hour or two went by, and like the reports are like, it's not coming on. I'm like, all right. So I was like, what could I do with this thing? So I kind of like watched it cool. I couldn't move it. I didn't have any pumps,
sure.
So I couldn't move it. I had no power to see anything, and I was like, all right. But I had made a beer 2 days before, I think a Kolsch actually, and I was like, all right, because I wanted to blanket it with CO2,
sure,
right? But I didn't want to like hook up just like my CO2 line to it, knowing that the alarms could fail or something like that. It could be dangerous to like just fill the place with CO2, which is obviously dangerous. So I hooked up from the blow-off line of that Kolsch brewing from 2 days before, through a keg. I put some iodine, some water, some iodophore in the water, right? And then I took the blow-off from that, which would be the fermenters, up through the transfer pipe through the whirlpool, up to the top of the CIP ball of the kettle.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just going to let this naturally with a blow-off blow up so it wouldn't go back into the Kolsch.
Sure.
Blow off up into the kettle upstairs. And it worked.
Nice.
2 days, a day and a half, I think, later, the power came back on. I cooked it and moved it down, and I forget what that beer was called, but it was about 3.5%, and it was
So is
nice.
that
It's really
was
nice.
that beer in the mash tun at the time, or was it in the kettle?
Mash tun,
It was
mash
in the
tun.
mash tun, yeah. So the old
Mm,
sour mash, boy. All right.
yeah, that's tough. That was tough. That was
I tell
tough.
you, man, it's so wild
Not ideal.
the function of oxygen in that situation, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it just goes so bad so fast.
Yeah, dude, you're getting like
And then
Acetobacter and all sorts of
oh
nasties.
man, it's yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's funny. And by the
It's
way,
a weird one.
the blow off through that's through the iodine. That's
I thought
I
you'd
gotta
appreciate that.
I gotta spend some time on that. That's something I wouldn't have. That's something I wouldn't have thought of myself.
I didn't have any other way to do it. I didn't know what other way to do it. I'm like, I
Well,
don't want to just shoot CO2 in this thing. Like, come
yeah,
on.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so kind of like wrapping up on these Lachancea fruit beers. I have kind of this finishing, carbonation, packaging type area of the discussion. Is there anything in particular that you think would be illuminating as far as that part of the conversation for these beers?
Um, they respond well to extracts. They respond well to fruit. They filter like anything else. And we've from a QA/QC standpoint, Zach, our QA/QC manager, and I think he just hit 4 years with us. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
He and Midwest Microbio have developed an assay for our quantitative PCR machine to be able to detect Lachancea. And we
Oh,
found that
nice.
it filters out normally like everything else, and also it's nearly undetectable after the first generation. So we know from a packaging standpoint, it's not carrying over, and even if it did carry over to the can or draft, it wouldn't make any difference. It's not like diastaticus or anything like that.
Sure.
CO2 wise, I think it's style dependent. What you guys are making, if you're making a Goza or whatever, bring it up. But
Yep.
wherever acid makes sense. I do think that acid plays better a little bit higher in the 2.5 plus. I
Mhm.
think Verde is probably 2.6, tastes like
Yep.
2.6, maybe a little bit more than that.
Yep.
And that carbonic acid does add to that lactic acid bite.
100%.
But
Yeah, I agree.
style determined.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, no, man, that's interesting. So, just kind of big picture. I mean, what are some of the things that you kind of uh I mean, well, I'm asking a little bit of a big picture question, but also a little bit of a practical. So we'll break it up like this, kind of long term. Where do you see Saucy going, beer wise in particular, and then kind of off of that, what are some cool fun things that we have coming up for this summer, because it's finally getting warm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I'll answer the summer part first because that's very easy. um, Summer, we're kind of doing this like summer of lagers thing, and we're
Nice.
bringing back a bunch of hits. We're just playing the hits, man. We've got we've got a 40-barrel batch of three different lagers in the pipes. One of them just went in last week. Separate checks. We do a
Nice.
Czech lager called Separate Checks.
Yeah.
Love that beer hard.
Yeah.
That's this summer. We're doing a 40 of Kato, which is a Japanese style lager. Has some rice in it
Yeah.
and Sriracha Ace in it.
Yep.
And we're doing a remix of a beer we did last year for our accountant David, our controller, called A Cruel Summer,
Yeah.
which is named after the Bananarama song, A
Okay.
Cruel Summer. When he suggested A Cruel Fall, I looked at him very confused. He didn't know it was the song. Anyway, we got those three. We've got El Lager on. We have Painted Schwartz on. Sometimes we have Up the Hill on, which
Nice.
is actually probably my favorite Hellas, the stateside.
That's kind of you.
It is. I've had a lot of them. It really is. And we have a Maibach going. It's in the tank right now working, called My.
Nice.
Maibach. So we have, I think, 6 or 7 different lagers going. That's coming up this summer. As well, we're working on a permanent NA with the Brewdog collaboration we had in
That's
January.
right.
Looks like
That's
they're going to
right.
make it for us. We have some NA coming. We're working on a vodka seltzer line this summer. I'm working on the 2024 calendar, which has a little bit more sours in it.
Sure.
Where I think Saucy's beer will go in the future. Right now, as you know, we're digging into water.
Yeah.
I've been kind of knowing that water has been a big influence on where beer has come from and gone stylistically and by region. I have left a lot of our beer to Cleveland's water being just charcoal filtered. And I'm well aware of what salts can do, and I've used them in the past, and we do use them to a small degree at Saucy. But we haven't changed our water a lot, and I think that on beers that we're shooting for certain stylistic targets, we will start to dial those into more of that range.
Mm-hmm.
But for beers that we're going to create, we're going to look at the water a little bit differently.
Sure.
We tend to create beers more than brew them when it comes to new beers, and nothing against brewing a stylistic Pils, Kolsch, American
Sure.
Stout,
Sure.
Belgian Abbey, whatever it is. Nothing against that, and we can do that. But I find it more of an artistic expression to take that knowledge we've learned and the skills we've gained from doing these things that have been done and we've ever tried and true, and put those things toward a new endeavor and create and push and see what we can get away with consumers. Like, do you like this? Is this cool? Does it taste like you don't like this? Okay, cool. Like whatever it is, But like push that boundary, make mistakes, and have successes, and just keep going. Like, let's not lean on are we gonna have RTDs, IPAs, and hard tea for like the next 30 years? Like,
Sure.
probably.
Yeah.
But like, what else is coming? Can we find a new beverage? Can we find a new combination?
Yeah.
And from the water side, that will be driven by Cleveland's water initially.
Sure.
So I don't know where Saucy Beer is going, but it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. That's awesome. And so just kind of as a little cap on it, where can people be finding Saucy Beers?
You can find Saucy Beers throughout the state of Ohio, in Giant Eagle, 26 Kroger's, Meyer, lots of independent stores, and on draft, mostly in the Cleveland area and in Columbus. We are just speckling ourselves down into Cincinnati. So the majority of it, you'll find it in your favorite watering holes in Cleveland, Columbus,
Awesome.
and La Giant Eagle.
Awesome. Well, Eric, man, I want to say thank you. I appreciate your time. It's always good, and I'm just repeating what I said at the beginning, but it's always good to I don't know, have that chance to talk product, to talk beer, man. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you making some time for this tonight, and yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up. And once again, anybody out there, because I do get the emails and different things like that with questions on you're building out your own place, your own brewery. Please go ahead and check out the Blickman stuff, you guys. Eric was mentioning they're using some stuff up in the Detroit location. But one of the cool things that I think they have going on is they have like Rolls-Royce homebrew rigs. And now they're doing work on more traditional pro size stuff as well. And just good folks. So please give them a shout if you're looking for anything on that end, and please let them know that you appreciate them sponsoring the channel. That goes a long way for me. And anyhow, we hope you guys have a great rest of April. It's gonna be, it's warming up. I don't know about you, but listen, man, Cincinnati's starting to get warm. I think it's even a little warmer here than it is up by you guys, Eric. But
I tend to not talk about Cleveland weather because we get it. Like it's either hot or it's cold, or like, you know what? Look at that. Yeah, that's what it is. Everyone's like, I want to complain about it all. Like, no, I don't give a shit. That's fine.
All right, Eric. Well, I'm gonna close up the stream, but hold on, because we'll still be on and we'll chat for a second.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on here. Amazing questions. I'm so happy to be working with you, and I hope that everyone can enjoy their weekend and got something out of this. And feel free to reach out to me or Adam for any questions about any of the stuff we talked about, for sure.
Definitely. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We will see you during the live stream Q&A on May 5th. Have a great night.